Stoned Lore is a series where video games are recapped from memory after consuming high amounts of marijuana. This means that the lore and story could get a bit jumbled along the way. That is the fun of the series. No script was used in the making of this video. All marijuana used was purchased and consumed legally under state law. When it comes to Metal Gear Solid, I always like to start with the VR missions, even on repeat playthroughs. Whenever I get a new copy or, like the saves have been wiped, I always end up starting with those first 10 VR missions, and there's not a whole lot to say about them. They're just pretty neat, aren't they? I always just run through them, and it also helps me, like it's supposed to, brush up on how to play Metal Gear. But yeah, I always start with those, and I've always thought they were really neat. And of course, there's that whole game VR missions. That's a story for another day for sure. But I've always had a soft spot for the VR, and then you just jump right into Shadow Moses. I always thought the beginning cutscene for Metal Gear Solid was pretty epic. Snake arriving at Shadow Moses Island, swimming up to the dock there. Getting into that underground warehouse place that has a really tremendous vibe to it, and I've always thought it was a really nice starting point, but of course it is with Kojima. So regardless, Snake jumps in there. We're getting after it immediately, sneaking around past guards, waiting for the elevator to come down. It's truly tactical espionage action. Elevator will finally come down. We jump up. There's a lot of story stuff going on. I'm pretty sure by this point we know that members of Foxhound, your old group, have threatened to launch a nuclear weapon. If their demands are not met, they want the remains of Big Boss, and eventually we find out they also want $1 billion and like the cure for Fox Die, but that's a bit ahead of ourselves here. So we ride the elevator up to the top, and that's where it really starts to kick off. You really see the scale. Back then, back in like the late 90s, this was a really fucking ridiculous scale for a video game. So just seeing this opening level was quite the OMG moment. So we meet Mei Ling, and we hear from Campbell that we need to go inside there, obviously. Sneaking inside there is pretty standard. You pretty much walk up, sneak up into that vent. We hear from McDonald Miller at that point, which, we'll find out about him later. But McDonald Miller, your old master, calls you Master Miller, and he'll tell you about the local flora and fauna of Alaska. And anyway, so we get through him. There's also that scene where the guards are like, oh, there's an intruder, he's using stealth, and Snake's like, there's an intruder besides me? And yeah, so we'll finally get into the building. With in Metal Gear, you gotta love it with the multiple prompts. Every time you like hit a new thing like a ladder or something like that, it's like, use the action button to climb down the ladder, which is good because, letting you know how to play the fucking game. But regardless, it gets pretty funny sometimes with like pointing out the obvious. But eventually we arrive inside the building. Venturing deeper into the facility, we eventually will go into some vents and we'll see a woman, not him, but that's our first glimpse of Meryl, and she's working out in her jail cell, which eventually leads to us meeting the DARPA Chief, Donald Anderson, or is it? Because we eventually find out that this is actually Decoy Octopus in disguise. He's a master of disguise, and he's used this talent to pretend to be the DARPA chief to get information from Snake, I'm imagining. Regardless, the DARPA chief has a heart attack, and Snake is like, what the hell is that all about? You know what I mean? We find out later about this Fox Die situation, but that's what's going on with the DARPA chief, the effects of Fox Die, which Snake is a carrier of. Then we have you're a rookie. Those are rookie's eyes. And hey, I'm no rookie, with Meryl inside of the soldier's uniform that she's stolen and left him naked on the floor, which that's foreshadowing to him being having a cold and being sick later. Anyway, Meryl and Snake eventually fight their way through the massive sea of guards that are coming through the door. And we get a cutscene where we see that Snake is checking out Meryl because of the way she sways when she walks, implying that Meryl thick. And we also see that TKs-Mantis briefly takes control of her mind, I'm guessing, because she fires at Snake. Damn. And we see TKs-Mantis for the first time. One of the best characters in video game history, I might add. We come to Revolver Ocelot, who is called Revolver because he uses a revolver implied by himself. He has the Arms Tech president, Kenneth Baker, with him, who's in pretty bad shape and being held hostage. So we end up fighting Revolver Ocelot. I usually make it a pretty quick fight, but it can, take a minute. But regardless, beat Ocelot. Then we see Gray Fox for the first time. The cyborg ninja comes in, chops the hand off of Ocelot. There goes that hand, which becomes a major plot point in the series moving forward. And then the Arms Tech president tells us more about Metal Gear, more about how we're being used as a pawn. That's the whole theme. And then falls to a heart attack, much like the DARPA Chief, caused by Fox Die. So this is kind of like a reoccurring theme now with the people Snake is meeting. Before he dies, Baker tells us that Meryl's codec is on the back of the CD case. Back in the day, that blew my mind. It blew many of my friends' minds that the game referenced its case for you to continue for the most part, because the internet was around, but it wasn't nearly close. I mean, I know you guys understand that, but I was there, man. Fucking, the internet wasn't even close to what it is now. So there wasn't, I mean, you could probably find out online what her codec was, but some people didn't have a PC in their home, didn't have the internet. I remember frequently going to the public library to use the internet back in those days. But regardless, you can get her codec that way, or nowadays, most people probably just look it up online, is what I was getting at. She opens a door for you, you end up in the Minefield, and then we get our first message from Deep Throat, which, spoiler alert, ends up being Gray Fox, Frank Yeager, Snake's old battle buddy from Zanzibar. But the cyborg ninja, and he's telling us, oh, there's mines there, use the mine detector. Luckily, I went and grabbed the mine detector. A lot of Metal Gear, it gives you special items by making you backtrack for this first Metal Gear Solid, and actually more along in the series as well. But in Metal Gear Solid, you often get a key card of a higher value so that you can open doors of a higher number, which you couldn't when you were in those areas before. So going back, you can find special items that way. Anyway, if you crawl, you collect the claymores that are laying on the ground. This leads to the first fight with, well, I guess it's not the first fight. We had the boss fight with Ocelot, but the first fight with Raven, kind of, with the tank. Throw some grenades in the tank, finish him off, and then it's into the nuclear weapons storage building. Can't use our weapons in here or get spotted, or the entire room fills with poison gas. So that's always fun. But the electric floor is really the star of the next chapter of this bit, using the Nikita missile launcher to kind of guide through the hallway. That was always a highlight for me. Then we come to the hallway of death. It immediately terrified me as a kid. My fault for probably playing the game too young. I was like 11 or 12 at the time when I first played Metal Gear Solid. My friend's dad was really into it, and he was hyping it big time when the trailers were coming out. Like, oh, this is going to be the best game in the world. oh my, I was like, oh shit, like I got to play this game. And so I credit him for getting me into it, actually. But yeah, I was probably too young to play it, but that's all right. It was much more lax back then, even with the rating system. I believe I got it for Christmas. I think my parents did buy it for me. But, well, I mean, of course they did. I was like 12. But you know what I mean? I think they like purchased it at the store and gave it to me as a gift. Not like, here's some money, go buy a video game. Could have been either or. Doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter to the point of the story. Hallway of Death always terrified me as a kid. Then we meet Otacon and Ninja. Or, you know, Frankie Edgar. Everybody just calls him Ninja. Anyway, that's a really cool fight. I always loved it. Just going hand to hand and fighting this cyborg ninja. And then, of course, we get the famous line afterwards from Otacon, Hal Emmerich, where he's like, it's like one of my Japanese animes. He might say that before the fight, actually. But still, pretty famous line. But an epic fight, and we meet one of the... well, two, really. I guess we met Ninja before, but we meet Otacon and Gray Fox. So two of the most iconic characters in one scene right there, bing bang. There's also a ton of references in this room. There's like a little PlayStation on the table and a Police Knots poster. It's a really cool designed, like I've always loved the way that this room was designed, and the fight that takes place here is one of the best in the series. Now we meet up with Meryl by finding her based on the way that she walks. If you follow her too fast into the women's bathroom, you get the cutscene with her in her underwear. I remember that as a kid. And she gets dressed and talks about how she's not like other women and how she's had that psychotherapy to kill her interest in men. A lot of very interesting Meryl lore happens in this moment. But then we... of course, follow her to the commander's room, and we are met with TKs-Mantis taking over our mind again, and the boss fight that follows. One of my favorite characters, like I said before, favorite characters in video game history. And my name's not necessarily based off of the TKs-Mantis name, isn't necessarily based off of it, but I tend to like things that are named after mantises. So the fact that, you know, he's TKs-Mantis, I was drawn to him, because I've always liked praying mantises. Anyway... we fight TKs-Mantis. You plug the controller into the second port so he can't read you. Fight, and once you do that, the fight's relatively straightforward. And then we push forward into, well, you know, there's a lot going on with TKs-Mantis. I don't want to just totally gloss over that. His father hated him because his mother died during childbirth. So since he could read minds, he saw his hatred, his father's hatred for him, and thought he was going to kill him. So he killed him first, burned down the whole village that he lived in. So he shares this like past trauma with Solid Snake, because Solid Snake took out Big Boss back in previous games, which Snake credits Big Boss as being his father, the only man who said that he was anyway. So regardless, there's a lot going on with Mantis. He wears a mask because he's too ugly, but it helps other people's thoughts not get forced into his head, so he wears that gas mask. Anyway, we go past, we push into the wolf caves. The wolves will attack you unless you punch Meryl and then get into a box. One of them will pee on the box. Then you can kind of have that safe travel through the cave when you need it coming up here pretty soon. Because we come to this area, and it always made me laugh as a kid, and it continues to make me laugh as an adult. Meryl does this really intricate pattern to like get around these mines that are in front of this big corridor, but you can just run straight forward and the mines won't get you. So I thought it was funny that Meryl does this really long intricate pattern of steps, and then you can just run right past it. It stops being funny after this because Meryl gets sniped by Sniper Wolf. This is our first real encounter with her, and we have to go back to get the PSG-1 because we couldn't do it while we were heading this direction for some reason. That's part of the game. So we go back and we get the sniper rifle. We go to fight Sniper Wolf, and we have a sniper. Actually, this is one of the fights that might take a minute, but again, relatively straightforward. Snipe at her, shoot her. Then you are caught and tortured by Revolver Ocelot. Liquid fills you in on a little bit of the plan. Liquid Snake, by the way, I haven't really even talked about him, which is ridiculous because we saw him at the beginning of the game. Liquid Snake is like the clone brother who got all the recessive genes of Solid Snake. They were both cloned from Big Boss. We find out more about this later, but Liquid fills you in on a little bit of stuff. Sniper Wolf marks you for death, calls you her target, and then Ocelot tries to get information out of you, interrogating you or torturing you. So there's like an electric current that runs through your body. If you match the circle button, you regain your stamina and your life, and you're able to fight it off, but it will actually hurt on harder difficulties to get that going. For the canon ending, I fail the torture, which, by the way, the canon ending, I'm pretty sure, is that Snake and Otacon ride away together because you see them in Metal Gear Solid 2 together, and then Meryl doesn't show back up until 4. But in order for the canon ending to be the canon ending, it would have to mean that Snake submitted to the torture with Ocelot. So it's interesting. I mean, I guess you could say that, you know, Snake saved Meryl, Meryl left, and then Otacon and Snake met back up. But regardless, I like the stealth camouflage. Jesus. The stealth camo when it comes to New Game Plus. I like having that more than the bandana, so I always do Otacon first so that I get the stealth for the next playthrough that I want to do. Regardless, you quit that and you end up in a cell. Now you're locked up under lock and key of Johnny, who is patrolling, and this is where we see that he's sick from being left out in the cold. We also got the shut up in there, will ya? Love it. But yeah, we got to figure out a way to get out of here. While we're in jail, if we contact Otacon, he can bring us like ketchup and some rations because he thinks we might be hungry. Once Johnny goes to the bathroom, using the ketchup can make it look like Snake died in jail, which will cause Johnny to open up the door. If you fuck that up somehow, you can still trick him by like hiding under the bed when he goes to sleep, and he'll think that you got out and he'll go in there to look for you. And then eventually, if you mess it up a bunch and just can't figure out how to get out of there and have exhausted all options, I'm pretty sure Ninja will come up and cut the door open. I don't know if that's the Twin Snakes or this one, because I always end up getting out of there before needing to do that. One of the things that comes up to me, we go back to where we got caught, go into the door, and there's this epic stair run because this camera automatically sees you when you go through one of the doors. I've tried using chaff grenades. Stealth doesn't matter. It's coded into the game. You always get spotted. And then you do this huge stair run with a bunch of guards. That always sticks out in my mind. But this is just leading up to meeting Liquid in the Hind. He starts to blow up the building. Luckily, you picked up a rope on your way up. Hopefully you did. If not, I think you have to go back for it. But end up rappelling down the side of one of the comms towers, going to the other one, and fighting the Hind D with the Stinger missile launcher. It's just a top tier boss fight. After which, we end up having to get Otacon to try to fix this elevator, and it turns out some dude stole his stealth camo and they're inside the elevator. So gotta take them out. It's kind of like a mini boss fight. But eventually we'll end up in the snowfield, our second encounter with Sniper Wolf. What I end up doing here is using the Nikita missile launcher to just kind of like use a missile and guide it, up through the snowbanks and just get her that way instead of doing the tedious sniping, always having to take diazepam to like calm your nerves and like make sure it's not shaky and shit. I just use the Nikita and missile guide to her. She ends up dying. Otacon's really upset because he wanted to know if love can bloom on a battlefield, and he was really into her. And so that was his first like loss in that situation. So he's pretty bummed out about that. But once we go into that next little area, it's time to insert disc 2. The second disc begins with us heading further underground, and eventually Master Miller will start blowing up our codec about Naomi being a spy because he doesn't buy some story she said. But going further down into the deep freeze, some big frozen warehouse, we meet Raven again. That's going to be the actual boss fight against Vulcan Raven. It's pretty intense, actually, especially when he starts running around and like heavy breathing. It can be a pretty intense boss fight. Raven's a really cool character. He always has cryptic metaphors to speak to Snake, and he's cool. I've always enjoyed him as a character, and fighting him here is definitely memorable with his big chain gun, his big minigun that he has. Anyway, we take him out, and then ravens consume his corpse. He tells us a hint about some shit going on. And then we continue. Coming up, we're going to get our first look at Metal Gear, like in person, I guess you could say it, because we've heard people talking about it the whole time, and we've seen it in like cutscenes. But this is our first time Snake in game is seeing it, and it's pretty impressive. Metal Gear Rex. Liquid and Ocelot are having a chat upstairs about their demands, and they're actually planting the seed of deceit when it comes to the PAL key inputs. And they eventually discover Snake, and the card ends up getting shot out of his hand. We go down, pick it up. This PAL key is pretty important, but the annoying thing about it is you have to change its temperature to use it. So the first one is room temperature. That's easy. But then we have to go to where we fought Raven, run around a bunch, hang out until the key turns blue. Then we can use it in the middle. And then finally, we go back to the blast furnace, and we... during that time, when you're going to heat the key up, Naomi gets arrested for being a spy, and we learn about fox dye being used as a weapon. Snake is a carrier of this fox dye thing, and I'm pretty sure something about his nanomachines inside of his bloodstream are triggering these people's their nanomachines. I forget if they have nanomachines in them as well. I think everybody does, but regardless, it causes heart attack like symptoms when Snake comes into contact with these people. Naomi's the one that is behind this because she's getting revenge for her brother Frank Yeager, which is the ninja, because Snake killed him or whatever. So big convoluted story. Anyway, Naomi gets arrested, but we heat up the key and we put it in, and LOL, the nuke is armed instead of being deactivated. So joke's on you, Snake. That was the seed of deceit that was being planted. Miller then calls and reveals himself to be Liquid this entire time, because McDonald Miller was found dead in his home 3 days ago. They're just now getting this intel because they found out that Miller's transmissions were coming from inside the base, and so they're like, oh shit, that's not who he says he is. Turns out to be Liquid. This is going to lead to our first Liquid encounter. He does some big long-winded speech, and he jumps into Metal Gear. So now we're fighting Metal Gear Rex. I got wrecked a couple of times fighting Metal Gear Rex on my last playthrough. But fighting him with the Stinger and chaff grenades is the way to go. Once we get through that, Ninja shows up, Frank Yeager shows up, Gray Fox, and kind of just the final blow to one of the domes on Metal Gear Rex, preventing it from doing what it was doing before. So now we're fighting, and then he gets crushed by Metal Gear Rex via Liquid. We finish that, and Liquid gives this big long-winded speech about les enfants terribles and how the terrible children, here we are. We were clones of Big Boss, and nobody loves us, and nobody really loved me because I have the recessive genes and you have the good ones. And the whole game, but like, if you were to take a shot every time in the end game of Metal Gear Solid that they use the word gene, like, genes like in your DNA, holy shit, man. Like I don't drink myself, but you'd have a problem. You might get alcohol poisoning if you were to do that. So don't do that. But it would be a lot of alcohol. That's what I'm getting at. Anyway, so he does this big long-winded speech. Hey, fuck you. I'm the shitty twin clone, and you are the better one. And because of that, my life is terrible. And so the Secretary of Defense calls and he's like, I'm going to nuke the whole fucking place. LOL. And you're like, why do that? And he's like, because your job is over. Ha ha ha. And it turns out that dude, I think Jim Houseman might be his name. I don't remember what they named him in the game, but anyway, he was behind the whole thing. He was anyway. We end up fist fighting Liquid because we're just gonna get nuked anyway. So might as well fist fight on top of Metal Gear in this epic tinted red fist fight with Meryl tied up in the background. Even though I failed the torture, so there's no way that I'm going to be able to save her in this playthrough. Otacon makes a remark after the... Otacon says the best line in the fucking game twice, and it's in the end game. The first one comes here when Snake's done fighting Liquid. He's like, oh, Meryl, I couldn't save you. Meryl. And fucking Otacon's like... Oh, but Snake says, I hope you can forgive me. And Otacon says, Meryl can't forgive anyone anymore. It's like, Jesus Christ, man. And then he goes on some long-winded tirade about Sniper Wolf, someone that he like just met. And like, well, I guess Snake just kind of met Meryl too, so it's probably the same. But regardless, it's time for the Jeep run. We get on to a Jeep to escape. We're flying down the parking garage. Snake's on the gun in the back. Surprise, surprise, here comes Liquid. And a battle ensues where we're shooting at Liquid in the Jeep. It's really cool. It's actually, so much of this game is just really fucking cool. And this is one of those moments. We end up crashing once we hit the end of the tunnel. Liquid comes out to give his last hurrah. Everybody thinks he's gone, but he's still there. And then he ends up dying. Due to Fox die. So that worries Solid Snake a little bit because they have the same exact genes. Well, I don't know. Who knows? Because my wife brought up a really good point of if they are clones of Big Boss, why do they need his remains so bad? Don't they have his genes? And I thought about it for a second. I was like, Liquid claims to have the recessive genes, meaning that Snake has the better ones. So maybe like Big Boss, just like they needed all of it. I'm sure they explained this in the game, but for some reason I can't think. Then we get that moment of, I'm Hal, I'm Dave, nice to meet you. But Snake asks Otacon during this ending bit if if he's gonna be working on any more robots or whatever, any more shit like this. And he's like, no, I'm done with science. I'm gonna go into human psychology. And it's like, that's still fucking science, man. Anyway, so they ride off into the sunset of Alaska on a snowmobile. That's the end. Of course, being Kojima, we get the fucking post-credits Ocelot. Yes, Mr. President. Double agent, triple agent, quadruple agent Ocelot working for all sides. He plays all sides, so he'll never lose. But that's Metal Gear Solid from memory after partaking in the Devil's Lettuce. I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble through it, and I can't wait until the next episode of Stoned Lore.